My name is Arthur, and this is the story of how my life was burned to the ground by my own children and how I rose from the ashes to become the very storm that washed their world away. When my wife of 45 years was given a death sentence by her doctors, I begged my wealthy, successful children for help. They didn't just say no, they laughed. They told me their mother's life was my problem. So, after she died in my arms, I made them my problem. I dug into their perfect lives and uncovered the sickening lies they were hiding. I plotted a revenge so perfect it would strip them of every single thing they had chosen over their own mother. Before I take you into the darkest chapter of my life, I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from today. Drop your city, your state, or even your country in the comments below, and let me know what time it is where you are. It's a small comfort to know that even in the toughest times, we're all connected. Okay, let's begin. For 45 years, my world was a simple one, forged in the fire and steel of the Cleveland factories where I worked as a welder. My hands are a roadmap of that life, calloused, scarred, permanently stained with the ghost of hot metal. They built a life, a home, and a family. They held my wife, Eleanor, on our wedding day. They held my son, Richard, the first time he grabbed my finger. They wiped away my daughter Jessica's tears after she fell off her bike. Those hands did everything for them. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It was built on sweat, loyalty, and love. Eleanor was the heart of it all. We met at a high school football game in the fall of '78. She had a smile that could melt a Cleveland winter. We built a life in a small brick house with a squeaky front porch swing, the kind of place where memories soak into the walls. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and we poured everything we had into our children. Richard, my son, was always ambitious. He had a mind for numbers and a hunger for success that Cleveland couldn't contain. He moved to Austin, Texas, and became a big shot in the tech world. All glass offices and fancy titles I didn't quite understand. When he wanted to start his first business, Eleanor and I took out a second mortgage on our house. We believed in him. We worked weekends for a year to make those payments, eating canned soup for dinner so he could chase his dream. He never looked back. Jessica, my daughter, was our little star. She dreamed of the California sunshine and a life she saw in magazines. She moved to Los Angeles and reinvented herself as a lifestyle influencer, whatever that means. Her life was a parade of perfect pictures online, brunches, designer bags, exotic vacations. When she wanted that big fairy tale wedding in Malibu, Eleanor cashed out her own retirement savings to pay for the venue. We flew out there, feeling like strangers in a world of glitz and glamour, but our hearts were bursting with pride. We thought we had given them the world. We were proud of the lives they had built, lives so different from our own. We were wrong. We hadn't given them the world. We'd given them a free pass, a safety net they took for granted. We taught them how to succeed, but we forgot to teach them how to be human. I didn't know it then, but our quiet life on that sleepy Ohio street was about to end. The storm was coming, and it was wearing the faces of our own children. We were driving to a routine appointment at the Cleveland Clinic one gray October morning, holding hands, talking about what to plant in the garden next spring. We had no idea we were about to walk into the end of our world. The doctor's office had that smell, that sterile, chemical scent of bad news. It clings to the air, to your clothes, a smell of disinfectant trying and failing to cover up the scent of despair. Dr. Miller was a kind man, but his eyes held a heavy sadness that told us everything before he even spoke a word. He pulled up the scans on his computer screen, black and white images that meant nothing to me, but they held the fate of my entire world. He began, "Arthur, Eleanor." The tests came back. It's lung cancer, stage 4. The words didn't register at first. They just hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Stage 4. I looked at Eleanor. The color drained from her face, leaving her as pale as the clinical walls around us. She squeezed my hand, her grip so tight her knuckles turned white. For 45 years, we had faced everything together. Job layoffs, sick parents, the teenage rebellion of our kids. But this felt like a wall we couldn't climb. I said, "What do we do? What are the options?" He sighed. He explained the standard treatments, chemotherapy, radiation, but he was honest. At this stage, they were about managing symptoms, buying a little time, not a cure. My heart sank into a dark, cold place I'd never known. Buying time? How do you put a price on a few months with the love of your life? Then he offered a sliver of hope, a desperate last-ditch chance. He said, "There is something else. It's an experimental immunotherapy treatment. It's new, out of the Mayo Clinic. The clinical trials have shown some remarkable results in cases like Eleanor's." Hope. It was a dangerous word, but it was all we had. I felt Eleanor's grip tighten on my hand. I could see the question in her eyes. I said, "We'll do it, whatever it takes." His face fell slightly. He said, "Arthur, it's important you understand, because it's experimental, it's not covered by insurance. The cost is significant." I braced myself. I was a factory man. I knew what big numbers were, but I was used to them on blueprints, not medical bills. I asked, "How much?" He looked down at his desk, then back at us. He said, "The full course of treatment is $250,000. $250,000. The number echoed in the silent room. It was more than our house was worth. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It wasn't a price tag. It was a death sentence. It was a wall so high, I couldn't see the top. We drove home in silence, the gray Cleveland sky weeping a cold drizzle that matched the feeling in my soul. That night, I sat in our small kitchen, the one where we had celebrated birthdays and worried over bills for decades. Eleanor had gone to bed, exhausted. I looked at our savings account online. After a lifetime of hard work, we had just over $30,000. It was a pittance. It was nothing. But then I thought of them, our successful children. Richard with his tech empire in Austin. Jessica with her glamorous life in LA. This was why we'd sacrificed. This was the family we had built. They wouldn't let their mother die over money. They just wouldn't. With a surge of renewed hope, I picked up the phone and dialed my son. How could I have been so naive? How could I have known I was calling the man who would slam the door on his own mother's life? The phone rang 4 times before Richard picked up. I could hear the faint clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation in the background. He was at one of his fancy business dinners. "Dad, what's up?" "I'm in the middle of something," he said, his voice impatient, distant. It was the voice of a busy man, a man for whom a call from his old father was an interruption. "Richie," I started, my own voice trembling slightly. "It's your mother." There was a pause. "Is she okay?" he asked. A flicker of something. Annoyance? Concern? I couldn't tell, in his tone. "No, son, she's not okay." I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The diagnosis. Stage 4. The words felt like shards of glass in my mouth. I told him about the experimental treatment, the sliver of hope we were clinging to. And then I told him the number. $250,000, I said, the figure feeling obscene as I spoke it aloud. "I know it's an incredible amount of money, Richie, but it's the only real chance she has. Your mother and I, we don't have it. I was thinking, if you and Jess could help, we could work something out, a payment plan, whatever it takes." The sound that came through the phone wasn't a sound of shock or sadness. It was a laugh, a short, sharp, dismissive laugh. It was the cruelest sound I had ever heard. "Dad, are you serious?" he said, the warmth completely gone from his voice, replaced with an icy condescension. 250 grand? That's not my problem." Not his problem. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. What did you just say?" I stammered. "Richie, this is your mother we're talking about. And I feel terrible for her, I really do. But this is a matter of personal responsibility. You guys are in your 60s. You should have planned for this. You should have had better insurance, a retirement fund for medical emergencies. My mind reeled. The second mortgage for his business, the weekends I worked double shifts to cover it, the pride we felt thinking we were investing in his future. We invested in you, I said, my voice cracking. That was your choice, Dad, he snapped back, his patience gone. Look, I have to get back to my dinner. This deal is worth millions. I can't be distracted. I hope you figure something out. I really do. Richie, please. I've got to go. Good luck with everything. The line went dead. I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. It was the sound of my world breaking. My son, my successful, brilliant son, had just hung up on his dying mother. He had reduced her life to a financial inconvenience. He had weighed her against a business deal, and she had lost. The rage came first, a hot, white flash that made my hands shake. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall. I wanted to scream. But then came the cold, crushing weight of despair. If my son, my firstborn, could be this cruel, what hope did I have? I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. But I couldn't give up. I still had one more call to make. I had to believe that my daughter, my little girl, would be different. I had no idea that what she was about to say would shatter the last remaining piece of my heart. My hand was still shaking as I scrolled through my contacts and found Jessica's name. I pressed the call button, my heart pounding a desperate rhythm against my ribs. Please, Jess, I prayed. Please be the daughter I remember. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright but distracted. I could hear music and the chatter of a crowd in the background. Daddy, hey, is everything okay? I'm at this launch party for a new skincare line. It's absolutely insane here. Her cheerful energy felt like a slap in the face. How could her world be so bright and carefree while ours was collapsing into darkness? Jess, honey, I need to talk to you. It's about Mom. The music in the background didn't stop, but her tone shifted instantly. A sigh of exasperation came through the phone. Oh, God, what now? She asked, the irritation in her voice as sharp as a needle. What now? As if her mother's health was just another inconvenience, another drama she had to deal with. I swallowed the lump of anger and pain in my throat and told her everything. The cancer, the stage 4 diagnosis, the glimmer of hope with the new treatment, and the impossible price tag that came with it. The line went silent. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. The distant party music was the only sound. Jess, are you there? I asked, my voice pleading. Yeah, I'm here, she finally said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Wow, that's a lot, Dad. Punts? Look, I feel awful about Mom. I really do. But $250,000? That's just not possible. It's insane. Then she delivered the final crushing blow. Actually, Rich and I were just talking about this the other day, about you guys getting older. These medical things, they're really your problem to figure out. We have our own lives, our own expenses. My mortgage on this LA condo is killing me as it is. My blood ran cold. They were talking about it like we were a line item in a budget, a future expense to be managed. You were talking about us like we're some kind of burden? I asked, the words catching in my throat. Don't be so dramatic, Dad, she scoffed. We're just being realistic. You can't expect us to derail our entire futures just because you two didn't prepare properly. We spent our futures on yours, I said quietly, thinking of her Malibu wedding, her journalism degree, the study abroad trip to Paris we'd paid for. Her response was instant and sharp. "Nobody asked you to do that," she snapped. "The cruelty of it stole my breath. Look, I have to go mingle, people are watching. Maybe try setting up a GoFundMe or something. A lot of people do that. I could even share it on my Instagram story." And then she was gone. The kitchen felt colder, emptier than ever before. I had been cut loose, set adrift by the two people Eleanor and I had dedicated our lives to. They had not just said no, they had lectured me, they had blamed us, they had made it clear that their mother's life was worth less than a business deal, less than a mortgage payment, less than an appearance at a party. The rage I felt for them curdled into something I didn't recognize, a cold, hard knot of grief and rage. What do you do when the children you raised become strangers who would watch their own mother die? Just as I hung up the phone, a soft, shuffling sound came from the hallway. Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in her old flannel robe, the one I'd given her for Christmas 3 years ago. She looked so small, so fragile under the harsh kitchen light, a ghost in our own home. Her eyes, usually so full of life, were clouded with worry. "Did you reach them?" she asked, her voice laced with a hope that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. "What did Rich and Jess say?" I looked at her, at the woman who had trusted me with her heart for 45 years, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't tell her that her children had just abandoned her on her deathbed. I couldn't let her last days be filled with that kind of heartbreak. In that moment, I made a decision. I would shield her from their cruelty, even if the lie choked me. I forced a smile, a brittle thing that felt like it would shatter on my face. "They're working on it, honey," I said, the words tasting like ash. "You know how busy they are. Rich is in the middle of a huge deal, and Jess has that big conference coming up. They send all their love. They said they're going to figure something out." The relief that washed over her face was immediate and absolute. Her shoulders relaxed, and she returned my smile with that trusting, beautiful smile that had captured my heart all those years ago. "I knew it," she whispered, shuffling over to give me a weak hug. "They're good kids, Arthur. They always come through when it matters." They always come through when it matters. The irony was so bitter, I thought I might be sick. That night, I lay awake long after Eleanor's soft breathing had evened out into a shallow sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows playing tricks on my eyes. On the nightstand, a framed photo of the four of us at Jessica's college graduation grinned back at me. We looked so happy, so proud, a perfect family. When had we become this? A collection of strangers connected only by blood and old memories? When had my children's hearts grown so cold? The hours ticked by. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the labored sound of my wife's breathing. In that darkness, a new feeling began to crystallize in my chest, pushing aside the despair. It was a cold, hard resolve, a welder's resolve. When a piece of metal is broken, you don't just cry over it. You pick up a torch, you create an intense fire, and you fuse it back together. My family was broken beyond repair. My children had made their choice. They had chosen money and their own selfish lives over their mother. Fine, if I couldn't fix my family, I would fix this problem myself. I would sell the house, I would cash out my pension, penalties be damned. I would drive for Uber if I had to. I would find the money to save my wife. But something else was decided in those dark, lonely hours. My children had made their choice. And choices, as I knew from a lifetime of fixing things, always have consequences. They just had no idea that I would one day be the one to deliver them.
The next morning, I started liquidating my life. The first thing to go was the car. Not our sensible daily driver, but my car, my treasure. A 1968 Ford Mustang I'd bought as a rusted-out shell when I was 20. I'd spent thousands of hours in the garage, patiently rebuilding it bolt by bolt. Richard learned to drive stick shift in that car, grinding the gears as I sat in the passenger seat, trying to be patient. The smell of the leather seats, the roar of the V8 engine, it was the soundtrack of my youth. I sold it to a collector for $22,000. The kid who bought it had no idea he wasn't just buying a car, he was buying my memories. I watched him drive it away until it was just a red speck in the distance, a part of my past disappearing down the road. Next came the tools. My workshop in the garage was my sanctuary. It was filled with tools my own father had passed down to me, heavy steel wrenches and hammers that felt solid and true in my hands. Each one held a story. The socket set I used to fix Jessica's bike, the welding torch I used to build the custom gate for our front yard, they were extensions of my own hands. I sold them piece by piece on Craigslist and at pawn shops, another $8,000. The garage felt eerily quiet and empty afterwards, like a library with all the books torn out. The hardest part was the pension. I had worked for 45 years at the same steel plant, breathing in metal dust and enduring scorching heat. That pension was my reward, the nest egg Eleanor and I were supposed to use to travel, to maybe see the Grand Canyon, to enjoy a quiet, comfortable retirement. I called the investment company and told them to cash it all out. The man on the phone warned me about the massive early withdrawal penalties, the taxes, the fees. I told him I didn't care. He couldn't understand. How could he? It wasn't his wife who was dying. $63,000 landed in my bank account, a fraction of what it should have been, but it was another piece of the puzzle. I sold Eleanor's mother's jewelry, with her tearful permission. I took out a second mortgage on our little brick house, plunging us into a debt we could never hope to repay. I scraped and clawed and sold every piece of our past that wasn't nailed down. In the end, I had just enough for 2 rounds of the experimental treatment, 2 chances, 2 rolls of the dice with my wife's life. I wired the money to the Mayo Clinic, my hand trembling as I clicked the button. It felt like I was pouring our entire existence, our work, our memories, our future, into a giant gaping hole, praying it would be enough. I told Eleanor that the kids had come through, that they had pooled their resources to help. The look of pride on her face was worth the lie. She believed in them. To the very end, she would believe in the children I knew we had already lost. Was this what it meant to be a parent? To sacrifice everything, even the truth, for a child's love? In the midst of this chaotic scramble for cash, selling off pieces of my soul for dollars, the phone rang one afternoon. The caller ID showed Richard's name. For a single, stupid moment, my heart leapt. Hope is a stubborn, foolish thing. I thought, maybe he's had a change of heart. Maybe his conscience finally kicked in. Maybe he's calling to apologize, to offer help. I answered, my voice softer than I intended. Richie? Hey, Dad, he said, his voice casual, almost upbeat. Listen, I've got a bit of a situation here and I need your help with something.
My breath caught in my chest. This was it. He was going to help. Anything, son. What do you need? Great, he said, and I could practically hear his slick salesman smile through the phone. So I'm trying to close on a new Porsche 911. It's a real beauty. The problem is, most of my capital is tied up in this new acquisition, so my credit looks a little tight on paper right now. The dealership needs a cosigner on the loan, just as a formality. I need you to do it. I was silent. I couldn't form words. A Porsche. He was calling me, his father, who was selling his own history to save his mother's life, to cosign for a luxury sports car. The audacity! The sheer, breathtaking selfishness of it was like a physical shock. Dad, you there? He asked, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. You want me to co-sign for a Porsche? I finally managed to say, my voice a strangled whisper. Yeah, it's no big deal. I'll be paying it off, obviously. It's just a signature. I figured it's a good chance for you to do the right thing and help me out here. Do the right thing. The words echoed in my head, a grotesque parody of morality. I thought of the '68 Mustang I had just sold, the car I had loved. I had sold my classic car for his mother, and he wanted my signature for his? The contrast was so stark, so obscene, it broke something inside me. The last flicker of hope for my son died in that moment. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it was as hard as the steel I used to weld. What do you mean no? Richard scoffed, his tone turning ugly. It's a simple signature, Dad. Don't be difficult. The answer is no, Richard. Unbelievable, he spat. After everything I've done, I ask for one small favor, and this is what I get? You're a selfish old man. You know that. He screamed a few more obscenities at me, his frustration boiling over, before he slammed the phone down. I stood there, the deadline buzzing in my ear. He called me selfish. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I realized then that my son wasn't just lost, he was gone. He had been replaced by a greedy, hollow stranger who wore his face. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that there was no coming back from this. He had drawn his line in the sand. I just hadn't drawn mine yet. I have to ask all of you, what would you have done? If your own child, after refusing to help save your dying wife, called you for a favor like that, what would you have said? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to know. We made the trip to the Mayo Clinic twice. Each time, I drove the 10 hours straight, fueled by coffee and a desperate, flickering hope. Eleanor was brave. She never complained through the long, draining hours of treatment, the needles, the nausea. For a few weeks after the first round, it was like a miracle. The color returned to her cheeks. Her appetite came back. She had the energy to sit on the porch swing with me, to watch the birds at the feeder. We allowed ourselves to hope. We'd talked about the future again. Not in years, but in seasons. Maybe we'd see one more Christmas. Maybe we'd feel the warmth of one more spring. But cancer is a cruel and clever thief. It gives you back a little of what it stole, just to make it hurt more when it takes everything away. By the second treatment, the cancer had adapted. It came back with a vengeance, spreading faster and more aggressively than before. Dr. Miller called me into his office, his face etched with a sorrow that mirrored my own. "I'm so sorry, Arthur," he said, his voice heavy. "The treatment isn't working anymore. There's nothing more we can do." Nothing more we can do. 4 words that ended my world. I brought Eleanor home on a cold Tuesday afternoon. Our little brick house, once a sanctuary of warmth and love, now felt too big, too quiet. It felt like a waiting room. I converted our bedroom into a makeshift hospital room. I rented a medical bed, set up an IV stand, and learned how to read the monitors that beeped and blinked through the long, dark nights. I became her nurse, her cook, her storyteller, her companion in the darkness. I read her favorite novels aloud, the ones with the pages worn soft from her touch. I played our wedding song on an old record player, its scratching melody filling the silence. I held her hand through the waves of pain that even the morphine couldn't quite conquer. She would drift in and out of consciousness, and in her lucid moments, her thoughts were always of them. "Have Rich and Jess called?" she would whisper, her voice as thin as paper. And I would lie, every single time. "Of course, honey," I'd say, smoothing the hair back from her forehead. "Rich called this morning. He's closing a huge deal, but he sends all his love. Jess sent a beautiful photo from a work event. They miss you terribly. They're just so busy." She would smile weakly, a ghost of her former radiance. "Tell them I love them," she'd murmur before drifting off again. "Tell them I understand."
The lies became easier with practice, but they carved a hollow space inside my chest. I was building a fantasy for her, a world where she was cherished and loved by the children she had adored. I was letting her die with a beautiful lie because the truth was too ugly, too monstrous to speak aloud in that sacred, quiet room. Each day, she got a little weaker, a little more distant. She was slipping away from me, and the two people who should have been holding her other hand were out living their lives, not sparing a single thought for the woman who gave them theirs. How could I ever forgive them for that? How could any loving parent? The end came on a Tuesday night in early March. The snow was falling outside, thick, silent flakes that blanketed the world in a pristine white, muffling all sound. The world was holding its breath, and I knew, deep in my bones, that my Eleanor was getting ready to leave it. At 2:45 a.m., her eyes fluttered open. She turned her head on the pillow, her gaze searching for me in the dim light of the room. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice so faint it was little more than a breath. I was by her side in an instant, taking her frail, cool hand in mine. "I'm here, love. I'm right here." Her eyes were clear, more lucid than they had been in days. She knew. She knew her time was short. She said, "I want to see them," she said, a single tear tracing a path down her hollowed cheek. "Just once more, please. Arthur, call them."
My heart shattered into a million pieces. The one thing she asked for, the one thing I couldn't give her. But I had to try. For her. I had to try one last time. With trembling fingers, I dialed Richard's number. Straight to voicemail. "I'm sorry, you've reached Richard. I'm currently unavailable. Please leave a message." His voice was crisp, professional, and utterly soulless. I didn't leave a message. Next, I dialed Jessica. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring she picked up, her voice thick with sleep and annoyance. "Dad? It's the middle of the night. What is wrong with you?" "Jess, it's Mom," I choked out, the words catching in my throat. "She's asking for you, for both of you. Please, honey, she doesn't have long." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her take a breath. For a heart-stopping second, I thought I heard a flicker of compassion. I was wrong. "Dad, I'm in Las Vegas for a conference," she said, her voice cold and final. "I can't just drop everything and get on a plane. It's impossible." "She's dying, Jessica," I sobbed, the last of my composure crumbling. "She's asking for you by name." Another pause. Then the words that would haunt me forever. "Look, I'm sorry, I really am. I'll try to make it back for the funeral. I have to go." The line went dead. I sat there in the silence, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. She would try to make it back for the funeral. The world outside was quiet and white. The monitors beside the bed sang their slow, steady rhythm. I looked at Eleanor, her eyes still open, still waiting. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't let her last moments be filled with the knowledge of their final, ultimate betrayal. I leaned in close, my tears falling onto her hand. "They're on their way, my love," I lied, my voice breaking. "They send all their love. They're rushing to be here." She managed one last weak squeeze of my hand. A faint smile touched her lips. At 4:17 a.m. on March 3rd, as the snow continued to fall, the monitors fell silent. My Eleanor, the love of my life, the mother of my children, died believing she was loved by the family we had built together. She died in my arms, alone but for me, and I was left in a silence so profound it felt like the end of the world. The days that followed Eleanor's death were a blur of gray numbness. I moved through the necessary motions, calling the funeral home, picking out a casket, writing an obituary. I called Richard's office. His assistant promised to pass on the message. I called Jessica. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message with the funeral details. Saturday at 2 p.m. Saturday came, cold and drizzling. I stood at the graveside at Riverside Cemetery, the rain soaking through my best suit, the one I'd worn at both my children's weddings. The funeral director had set up 30 chairs under a green tent. 28 of them remained empty. Only Eleanor's sister, Carol, and my brother, Tom, had come. "Where are they, Arthur?" Carol whispered, her eyes scanning the empty cemetery road, searching for a car that would never arrive. "They're not coming," I said simply. The words held no anger, no sadness. They were just a statement of fact. A cold, hard truth. The minister began the service, his words about love and devotion and family ringing hollow in the empty air. I didn't hear him. My gaze was fixed on the 2 empty chairs in the front row, right beside me. The funeral director had marked them with white ribbons, for family. The rain dripped from the ribbons onto the empty seats, like tears for the children who weren't there to cry their own. I stood there long after the brief service ended, long after Carol and Tom had given me a final worried hug and left. I stood there as the cemetery workers, with practiced efficiency, began to lower my wife's casket into the dark, wet earth. I stood there until the grave was filled, a raw scar on the green lawn. That night, I sat in the kitchen where Eleanor had left her favorite coffee cup on the counter months ago. I hadn't moved it. My phone buzzed, startling me in the silence. It was a text from Richard. "Sorry for your loss. Couldn't get away from work. Let me know about the will." No call, no apology, just a cold, calculating message about the will. A few minutes later, Jessica posted a new picture on her Instagram. It was a picture of a sunset over the Las Vegas Strip, a cocktail in her hand. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to learn to let go of negative energy and embrace the beautiful moments. #blessed, moving forward." That was it. That was the eulogy for their mother. A text about a will and a tone-deaf Instagram post. Something inside me, something that had been cracking for months, finally snapped. The grief, the sadness, the pain, it all burned away, leaving behind something else, something cold and hard and razor-sharp. I walked to our bedroom, to Eleanor's jewelry box. I took out her simple gold wedding band. The inscription inside read, "Forever and always, A.W." I slipped it onto my pinky finger. It was loose, but I could feel its weight, a constant reminder. I whispered to the empty house, "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I'm sorry I let you die with a lie." In that moment, a promise was forged, not to her, but to myself. My children had decided that family was optional, that love was disposable. They were about to learn that every choice has a price, and I would be the one to collect the debt. I sat there in that empty house, and I knew I couldn't let it end like this. They had chosen money over their mother. Now, I would make sure they had neither. What I discovered next, hidden in their perfect, curated lives, was a web of deceit and corruption far darker than I could have ever imagined. Stay with me, because you're going to want to see how I brought their entire empire crashing down around them. Grief is a strange thing. For weeks, it was a heavy blanket that suffocated me. But after that night, after the text and the Instagram post, it began to change. The soft, sorrowful edges of my pain began to sharpen, to harden into a new kind of purpose. I wasn't just a grieving husband anymore. I was a man with a mission. My first call wasn't to a grief counselor. It was to Ben. Ben Carter. Ben was a lawyer, but not the kind you see on billboards. He was the kind of lawyer powerful people call when they need problems to disappear, or when they want to create problems for someone else. We had grown up together in the same Cleveland neighborhood. His father and I worked at the same plant. I had fixed his first car for free, kept it running through his law school years when he was broke. He'd always said, "Arthur, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you call me." For 30 years, I never had. Now, I was cashing in that favor.
I met him at his downtown office, a place of dark wood and leather that smelled of success. He offered his condolences, his voice filled with genuine sadness. He had known Eleanor. He knew what a wonderful woman she was. I didn't waste time with small talk. I laid it all out on his polished mahogany desk. The cancer, the $250,000, the phone calls, the laughter from my son, the irritation from my daughter, the empty chairs at the funeral, the text message about the will, the Instagram post. As I spoke, I watched Ben's face change. The sympathy in his eyes was slowly replaced by a cold, professional anger. When I finished, the room was silent. "What do you want from me, Arthur?" he finally asked, his voice low. "What's the end game here?" I placed Eleanor's wedding ring, the one now on my pinky, on the desk between us. "They chose money over their mother, Ben," I said, my voice steady. "So I want them to lose what they chose. I want to strip away every dollar, every fake friend, every bit of the success they built on the back of our sacrifices. I don't want them in jail. Not yet. I want them to be destitute. I want them to feel what it's like to have nothing and no one to call for help. I want them to understand what true poverty feels like. Not a lack of money, but a lack of love." Ben leaned back in his leather chair, studying me. "These are your children you're talking about, Arthur." "No," I said quietly, the truth of the words settling deep in my bones. "My children died the day they let their mother die. The people I'm talking about are just strangers who happen to share my DNA." A slow, grim smile spread across Ben's face. He picked up the ring and handed it back to me. "All right, Arthur. Operation Payback is officially underway, but you need to be sure. Once we start this fire, there's no putting it out." I slid the ring back on my finger. "Ben," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching, "strike the match." My path was set. There was no rage, no screaming, just a quiet, cold, all-consuming mission. I would become the architect of their ruin, and I would build it with the same patience and precision I once used to weld steel. They had no idea the war that was coming for them. Ben was a master at his craft. He knew that to dismantle an empire, you had to find the cracks in its foundation. And my children's empires, built on greed and ego, were riddled with them. He didn't work alone. He had a network, a collection of specialists who were the best at what they did, digging up dirt. First, for Richard, Ben introduced me to a woman named Sarah. She was a forensic accountant, a quiet, fiercely intelligent woman in her 40s with eyes that missed nothing. There was a reason she was so good and so willing to help. She had previously worked as the head of accounting at Richard's firm in Austin. She had been fired 2 years ago. Richard had framed her, making her the scapegoat for a clerical error that cost his investors $500,000. In reality, that error was Richard's first major attempt at embezzlement. He had ruined her career to cover his tracks. When we told her what we wanted to do, she didn't just agree to help, she embraced the opportunity with a cold, focused fury. Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked from the shadows. She still had contacts inside the firm, people who resented Richard's arrogance. She guided them on what documents to copy, what server logs to access. The information she unearthed was staggering. Richard wasn't just a ruthless businessman, he was a prolific criminal.
He was running a sophisticated scheme diverting investor funds into offshore shell companies. He was inflating property values on paper to secure larger loans, then pocketing the difference. One transaction alone, a commercial development project, showed he had funneled over $2 million directly into a private account that he used to fund his lavish lifestyle: the house, the cars, the women. "He's not just unethical, Arthur," Sarah said, sliding a thick binder across the table to me during one of our secret meetings. "He's a house of cards. One strong gust of wind, and it will all come down." And we were about to summon a hurricane. For Jessica, the approach was different. Her crimes weren't on a federal level, they were smaller, more personal, rooted in vanity and deceit. Ben found Chloe, Jessica's former roommate and business partner from her early days in LA. Jessica had pushed Chloe out of a small online boutique they had started together, stealing Chloe's business plan and taking all the credit. Chloe had been heartbroken and broke, forced to move back home with her parents. She was now a successful graphic designer, but she had never forgotten the betrayal. Chloe provided us with a treasure trove of evidence. Text messages where Jessica laughed about lying on credit card applications. Emails where she detailed how she was fabricating income statements to get the loan for her ridiculously expensive condo. She was now a successful graphic designer, but she had never forgotten the betrayal. We even found proof that she had used a company credit card from a brand she represented to pay for a vacation to Bali, writing it off as a business expense. Chloe also painted a picture of Jessica's finances. She was drowning, over $150,000 in credit card debt, living month to month, all while projecting an image of effortless wealth on Instagram. I spent my nights in my quiet house, not grieving, but studying. I went over every document, every spreadsheet, every text message. I was the retired welder. I was learning about shell companies and wire fraud. My hands, once skilled at joining pieces of metal, were now learning how to tear a life apart, piece by piece. The evidence was compiled. The weapons were loaded. All that was left was to choose the day to go to war. How could two children, so blessed with opportunity, become so corrupt, so rotten to the core? The preparation took 2 months. 2 months of late nights, secret meetings, and quiet, meticulous planning. My little brick house in Cleveland became the war room for the takedown of my own children. I learned to be invisible. Ben taught me the art of anonymity in the digital age. I bought a burner phone with cash. I used library computers to create untraceable email accounts. I purchased a cheap printer from a Walmart 2 towns over and wore gloves every time I handled a piece of paper. There would be no trail leading back to Arthur, the grieving old welder. I was the one who assembled the packages. For Richard, it was a work of art. Sarah had helped me create a devastatingly clear narrative, complete with highlighted bank statements, forged invoices, and a flow chart that showed exactly how he moved stolen money through his maze of shell companies. It was a step-by-step guide to his crimes, so simple a rookie FBI agent could understand. We made 6 identical copies, one for the SEC, one for the FBI's white-collar crime division, and one for the IRS. And 3 for the most influential financial reporters in Texas, including the Austin Chronicle.
For Jessica, the packages were more personal, designed to dismantle her social standing and financial stability simultaneously. We included copies of her fraudulent loan applications, the damning emails to her old business partner, and the credit card statements showing her personal use of a corporate card. These were sent to the fraud departments of Visa, American Express, and her mortgage lender. A special package, which also included screenshots of her disparaging comments about the company, was sent directly to the CEO of the skincare brand she represented. The night before I was set to mail them, I couldn't sleep. I walked into Eleanor's sewing room. It was untouched, just as she'd left it. Fabric squares for a quilt she was making for a grandchild we would never have were still laid out on her table. A project left unfinished. A life interrupted. I picked up a piece of soft blue cotton, a scrap from one of Richard's old baby blankets. "Tomorrow, it begins," I whispered into the silent room. They thought their love had a price. Now they're going to learn the cost of betrayal. At 5 a.m. the next morning, I drove a cash-rented car to a series of different post offices in and around Cleveland, mailing each package from a different location. By 9 a.m., it was done. The fuses were lit. I spent the rest of the day in a strange state of calm. I returned the rental car. I burned the gloves and the printer receipt in my backyard fire pit. I mowed the lawn. I fixed my neighbor's leaky faucet. I acted like a normal retiree on a normal Tuesday. But in offices in Austin, New York, and Washington, D.C., my anonymous packages were being opened, alarms were being raised, and the world my children had built on a foundation of lies was about to be hit by a seismic shock. I sat on my porch swing that evening, drinking a beer, watching the sun go down. I didn't know when the explosion would happen, but I knew it was coming. And I knew it would be bigger and more destructive than anyone could ever imagine. The first tremor hit faster than I expected. It was Wednesday afternoon. I was cleaning out the garage when Ben called, his voice electric with excitement. "Turn on the financial news channel, Arthur, right now." I rushed inside and switched on the TV. And there it was. The headlines scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Austin-based tech giant Innovest raided by FBI amid fraud allegations. My son's company. They showed live helicopter footage of federal agents carrying boxes of documents out of Richard's gleaming glass office building. The reporter spoke of an incredibly detailed anonymous tip that had triggered the investigation. My son's face flashed on the screen, his official corporate headshot. That confident, predatory smile of his now looked like the face of a common criminal. Trading on his company's stock was suspended. His biggest investors were already issuing statements, distancing themselves, expressing their shock and disappointment. By that evening, Richard himself made an appearance. He was ambushed by reporters as he tried to leave his lawyer office. The polish was gone. His $1,000 suit was wrinkled, his tie was askew, his eyes were wild with panic and rage. He snarled at the cameras. "These allegations are baseless. It's a witch hunt orchestrated by my competitors." He was lying. He was cornered. And I could see the terror behind the bravado. It was the same look he had when he was 10 years old and I caught him stealing money from his mother's purse. The fallout for Jessica was quieter, but in her world, just as devastating. On Thursday morning, I got an email forward from Chloe. It was an internal memo from the skincare company officially terminating their partnership with Jessica, citing a breach of contract and conduct, quote, "not aligned with our brand values," end quote. Then her digital world began to implode. Her credit card for a sponsored lunch was declined. She tried to pay with another, declined. The whispers started among her circle of fake influencer friends. By Friday, the story broke on a popular LA gossip blog. Lifestyle influencer Jessica Miller dropped by brand, rumored to be in financial ruin amid fraud allegations. They used her own Instagram photos against her. Pictures of her on a yacht juxtaposed with the evidence of her fraudulent loan applications. Her carefully curated house of cards was collapsing in on itself in real time for the entire world to see. She didn't stay quiet. She went on Instagram Live that night, mascara streaming down her face, slurring her words as she rambled about haters and jealous people trying to tear her down. She was playing the victim, the one role she had perfected her entire life. I watched it all from my kitchen table, sipping tea from Eleanor's favorite mug. I felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction, just a cold, quiet sense of order being restored. The universe was balancing its books. They had built their lives on lies, and now the truth was pulling them under. The phone rang late Friday night. It was an Austin number I didn't recognize. My heart hammered in my chest. Was it him? Was it time for the first real taste of my revenge? I let the phone ring 4 times, listening to the unfamiliar number buzz against the quiet of my kitchen. I wanted him to wait. I wanted him to feel that sliver of panic, that uncertainty. Finally,
I picked it up and said nothing. Just waited. "Dad?" A voice crackled on the other end. It was Richard, but it wasn't the voice of the confident CEO who had laughed at me just a few months ago. This was the voice of a broken man, a desperate man. I remained silent. "Dad, are you there?" he pleaded, his voice cracking. I need your help. I'm in trouble, real trouble." "I see," I said, my voice calm, level, betraying none of the cold triumph I felt inside. He took my monotone response as an invitation, and the words came tumbling out in a frantic, panicked rush. "They froze everything, Dad. My bank accounts, my investments, the company assets, all of it. The lawyers, they want a $500,000 retainer just to start the case, and I can't access a penny. Someone set me up. They leaked documents. They told them everything." I listened patiently, letting him pour out his terror and disbelief. He sounded like a little boy who had been caught with his hand in the cookie jar, unable to believe he was actually facing consequences. "I'll pay you back, I swear," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Double. I'll pay you back double. I just need you to mortgage the house again. Get a loan. Anything. It's all just a big misunderstanding. I can fix this. I just need some liquidity." Mortgage the house. The same house I had already leveraged to pay for his mother's treatment. The audacity of it was almost poetic. He had refused to give me money to save a life, and now he was begging me for money to save his lifestyle. I thought of Eleanor, of her frail hand in mine in her final hours. I thought of the empty chairs at her funeral. The cold knot of purpose inside me tightened. "I'm sorry, son," I said, and the words flowed from me as if I had been rehearsing them my entire life.
The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It stretched for a full 10 seconds. I could feel his shock, his disbelief, radiating through the phone. What did you just say?" he finally stammered. "I said, it's your problem," I repeated, my voice as cold and hard as a Cleveland winter. "You should have planned for this. You should have been more responsible." A strangled, choking sound came from his end. You're throwing my own words back at me? Now? This is different. I'm your son." "My son let his mother die," I said quietly, the words like chips of ice. That's when he exploded. The pleading was gone, replaced by a torrent of pure, unadulterated rage. He cursed me, called me a vindictive, hateful old man. He accused me of enjoying his downfall. He screamed and threatened, and finally, when his anger was spent, he started to sob. Broken, pathetic sobs. I listened to it all. When he was finally finished, I said one last thing. "Your mother died thinking you loved her. That was my last gift to her. Goodbye, Richard." I hung up the phone and blocked his number. The first debt had been collected. I walked out to my workshop, the one now empty of my father's tools, and for the first time since Eleanor died, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. The first domino had fallen, but I knew the game wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I just want to take a moment and thank you for sticking with me on this journey. It's not an easy story to tell, and it means the world that you're here listening. If you're still with me, do me a favor and comment the number 1 down below so I know you're still here. All right, let's finish this. I didn't have to wait long for the other shoe to drop. 2 days later, a sleek black Mercedes I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. It wasn't one of Richard's flashy sports cars. Richard got out of the driver's side, but he looked like a ghost. His expensive suit was crumpled. His face was pale and unshaven, and the arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a desperate, haunted look. Then the passenger door opened. It was Jessica. If Richard looked like a ghost, she looked like a refugee. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. She was wearing sweatpants and a stained college hoodie, her hair thrown into a messy bun, her face puffy from crying.
They looked like strangers wearing my children's faces. They stood on my driveway, the two of them, united for the first time in months, not by love, but by their shared ruin. "We need to talk," Richard said, his voice flat. I didn't invite them in. I stayed on my porch, wiping my greasy hands on a shop rag. "Talk," I said. "Someone is destroying us, Dad. Systematically. This isn't random. It's someone who knows us, knows where to hurt us." I leaned against the porch railing, looking from one to the other. "And you came to me. Why?" "Because you're the only one who hasn't been affected." Richard's eyes narrowed, a flicker of his old intelligence shining through the desperation. "Everyone connected to us, business partners, investors, even friends, is being investigated or questioned. But not you, the quiet old welder in Cleveland. How convenient." The accusation hung in the air. I let it sit there for a moment before I spoke. "Maybe that's because I lived an honest life. Maybe it's because my hands are dirty from work, not from theft." "Cut the crap." Richard stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Did you do this? Did you destroy your own children?" I met his gaze, my own as hard as steel. "I don't have any children," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "My children died at 4:17 a.m. on March 3rd. That's when their mother died, waiting for a phone call that never came from children who were too busy." Jessica let out a sob. "We made a mistake, okay?" she cried. "We were wrong. Is that what you want to hear? We were selfish, and we were wrong, and we're sorry." "Sorry?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that made them both flinch. "Sorry now? Now that your bank accounts are empty and your friends are gone? Were you sorry when she couldn't breathe? Were you sorry when you were posting pictures from Vegas while she was taking her last breath? Don't you dare talk to me about being sorry." They stood there, defeated. Finally, Richard looked at me, his eyes hollow. "What do you want, Dad? What will it take to make this stop?" This was the moment, the end game. I went back inside for a moment and came out with a folder. I tossed it on the porch railing in front of them. "Sign these," I said. Richard snatched the papers. His face went from pale to ghostly white as he read them. These are promissory notes for everything. College tuition, the down payment on my first house, Jessica's wedding. Dad, this is over $4 million. $4,200,000 and change," I corrected him. "Every penny your mother and I invested in you, plus interest. A bill for the lives you were given." "This is insane," Jessica shrieked. "Is it?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "What's insane is letting your mother die for the sake of convenience. Now sign those papers, because the final phase of my plan hasn't happened yet. The IRS hasn't received their package with your last 20 years of fraudulent tax returns. Sign them, or by Monday morning, you'll know what fresh hell really looks like." They looked at each other, then back at me. They weren't seeing their father anymore. They were seeing the man who had taught them their first lesson about consequences, and the tuition was due. They signed. Their hands shook, and Jessica's tears stained the ink on the page, but they signed every last document. They had no choice. They had built their lives on the assumption that there would always be a safety net, that their old dad in Ohio would always be a resource to be tapped and then ignored. They never imagined that the safety net would one day become a trap. I took the signed papers from them and walked them back to their rented Mercedes in silence. As Richard started the engine, I leaned down to Jessica's open window. "Your mother's last words were about you both," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but each word was a dagger. "She died believing you were rushing to her side. I gave her that lie as a final kindness, but I won't give it to you. Live with the truth." I watched them drive away, two ghosts retreating back into the ruins of their lives. The promissory notes were filed by Ben the very next day, becoming legally binding liens against any and all future earnings they might ever have. The final checkmate. What happened next, I didn't orchestrate, but I watched with a cold sense of detachment. The unity they had shown in my driveway, their us against the world mentality, evaporated the moment they were left alone with the totality of their destruction. They turned on each other with the ferocity of cornered rats.
It started with a long, rambling Facebook post from Jessica. It's so heartbreaking when your own family, people you trust, turn out to be toxic manipulators. Some people would rather drag everyone down with them than take responsibility for their own crimes. The implication was clear. It was all Richard's fault. Richard retaliated through his lawyer. He released a statement claiming his sister was not only aware of his creative business practices, but had been a willing beneficiary, accepting lavish gifts and financial support she knew were derived from his schemes. He produced receipts, the down payment for her condo, the seed money for a failed startup, all paid for with funds he had embezzled. It became a public spectacle. Jessica gave an interview to a gossip blogger, painting herself as a naive victim. Richard leaked emails where she begged him for money, promising to do whatever it takes to secure loans. Their public feud provided prosecutors with a mountain of new evidence against both of them. Then their personal lives completely unraveled. Richard's wife, Patricia, filed for divorce, took her two children and moved to California, making it clear in the court filings she would not be associated with his criminal enterprise. Jessica's fiancé, a man whose reputation was built on his family's old money, broke off their engagement so fast it gave the gossip blogs whiplash. Within a month, they had lost everything. Their careers, their money, their friends, their partners, their children, and each other. They were utterly and completely alone, an isolation of their own making. I had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had destroyed them. The final act of their downfall played out not in the news or on social media, but in the quiet, sterile halls of justice. I didn't have to be there, but I went. I wore the same suit I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral. Richard's criminal trial was a formality. With the evidence from Sarah and the confessions he and Jessica had made while attacking each other, the prosecution had an airtight case. He was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in a federal prison. I watched as they led him away in handcuffs. He looked thin, gray, and a decade older. He glanced at me once from across the courtroom, his eyes empty of everything but defeat. Jessica's fate was a different kind of prison. She declared bankruptcy, a humiliating process that laid bare every foolish purchase and every lie she had ever told. Her condo was foreclosed on. Her car was repossessed. With nowhere else to go, she ended up moving into a small spare room in her ex-fiancé's mother's house, the woman taking pity on her. She went from being an LA influencer to an unemployed woman in her late 30s living on charity with a legal judgment against her that would garnish 25% of any income she ever made for the rest of her life. The debt to me, the debt for her mother's life, would follow her forever. After Richard's sentencing, I drove to Riverside Cemetery. The autumn leaves were turning, painting the trees in brilliant shades of red and gold. It was beautiful. I stood before Eleanor's headstone, a simple granite marker that read, Eleanor Walker, beloved wife and mother. I replaced the faded flowers in the vase with a fresh bouquet of her favorite yellow roses. It's done, my love, I whispered to the cold stone. They've lost everything they valued more than you. The money, the status, the false friends, it's all gone. I knelt down and traced the letters of her name. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy.
I felt finished. The raging fire of my grief and anger had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a quiet, empty peace. The scales of justice, which had been so horribly tipped, were now level. The ledger was balanced. I had kept my promise. They had learned that choices have consequences, that love rejected becomes a debt collected. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and for a moment, just a moment, I could almost feel her presence beside me, her hand on my shoulder. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my knees, and walked away, leaving the past behind me among the silent stones. I don't know if what I did was right or wrong in the grand scheme of things. I'm not a philosopher or a priest. I'm just a man who loved his wife and couldn't stand by while her memory was dishonored. I don't feel happy about what happened to my children, but I don't feel sad either. I feel balanced. The world makes sense again. I live a quiet life now. My little house is filled with memories, but they are no longer just sad ones. I've started working in my garage again, fixing old lawnmowers and rusty cars for my neighbors, usually just for a fresh-baked pie or a cold beer. It feels good to build things again instead of tearing them down. Small kindnesses for good people who understand that life isn't about what you own, but who shows up for you when the chips are down. I found a quiet kind of peace, not in revenge, but in the simple, honest work of my hands, the way I had lived my whole life. My story is a hard one, but I believe it carries an important message. Family is not a transaction. It's not a bank you withdraw from when you're young and then forget about when you're successful. It's a sacred bond, woven from threads of love, sacrifice, and showing up for each other, especially when it's hard. When that bond is broken by greed and selfishness, the cost is always higher than any amount of money. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it meant something to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Have you ever faced a difficult choice between family and finances, or felt let down by the people who should have been there for you? Please feel free to share your own experiences. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone can make all the difference. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up so more people can find it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories like this one. Your support truly means the world. Thank you for being here.